Hello, this is Jason Nunez, one of the hosts of Journeys of Hope. If you would like to join us in our mission as missionaries of hope by supporting this program, please consider sponsoring a month via our wish list at pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Thank you. Now, here is your journey of hope.
Journeys of Hope, an introduction to the universal church that promotes an attitude of pilgrimage among the faithful by introducing you to pilgrim destinations around the world.
Welcome to Journeys of Hope, your spiritual passport to sacred destinations around the world, placing you in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the Apostles, and the Saints. I'm Jason Nunez, Media Ministry Assistant for Pilgrim Center of Hope, a nonprofit ministry founded in 1993. Thanks for being with us on this journey.
And I'm Angela Sealana, Media Coordinator for Pilgrim Center of Hope. For the last 29 years, Pilgrim Center of Hope has led well over 80 authentic spiritual pilgrimages to various pilgrimage destinations throughout the world, equipping us to lead you on audio spiritual pilgrimages. Journeys of Hope, along with broadcasting over the radio airwaves, is also a podcast available through major podcast apps and on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org.
This week, we're journeying to the National Martyrs Shrine in Ontario, Canada, the Shrine of North American Martyrs.
Yep, Jason, during this spiritual pilgrimage, we will learn about the persons called the North American Martyrs, what happened to them, and why. What does the Martyrs Shrine offer to pilgrims, and how is its relationship with the local indigenous people today? We'll also learn how this spiritual journey can inspire us in our daily lives.
Yes, so the Shrine of the North American Martyrs, located in Midland, Ontario, Canada, which is called Martyrs Shrine, honors 8 men who laid down their lives for the indigenous people and the Catholic Christian faith. 5 were martyred in the region of Huronia around the Great Lakes of North America, and 3 were martyred in modern-day New York State.
These saints' names are Jesuit Father John de Brebeuf, Jesuit Father Isaac Jogues, Jesuit Donné Jean de Lalande, Jesuit Brother René Goupil, Jesuit Father Gabriel Lalemant, Jesuit Father Antoine Daniel, Jesuit Father Charles Garnier, and Jesuit Father Noel Chabanel.
Before we take you through the land where they gave their lives, let's begin learning about the story of these men. First, Father John de Brebeuf. John's family was probably well connected in France, and perhaps even in England. He wanted to enter the priesthood from an early age, but his health was so bad that there were doubts about whether he could make it. He entered the Jesuits when he was 24 years old and was ordained a priest in 1622. Now, he landed in Quebec in June 1625. At the age of 32, along with Jesuit Fathers Charles Lalemant and Animan Massé, the 2 Jesuit brothers, he lived 5 months among the northmost group of the Inus people in the cold and snow. Before he was sent to live among the Wendat people, with whom the French were allies, the French called the Wendat Hurons. Father John traveled 800 miles by canoe. This was a 20 to 30-day trip, including trampling through forests, mosquitoes, supply difficulties, lack of hygiene, and exhaustion.
I can only imagine.
Right.
The harsh and hardy climate so agreed with him that the natives, surprised at his endurance, called him Echon, which meant load bearer, and his massive size made them think twice about sharing a canoe with him for fear that it would sink. Although he lived among and was apprenticed in language by one of the chief Wendat tribes, Father John's missionary attempts apparently failed. Brebeuf had great difficulty learning the language. He wrote in a letter home, "You may have been a famous professor or theologian in France, but here you will merely be a student, and with what teachers? The Huron language will be your Arist Lacrosse." However, Father John eventually wrote a catechism in Huron and a French to Huron dictionary for use by other missionaries. He was sent back to Quebec, then back to France with other missionaries. While in France, he took his final Jesuit vows and was there for a short time in priestly ministry.
He returned to present-day Canada in 1633 and was entrusted with founding a proper mission. However, it was greatly unsuccessful in its attempts to spread Christianity. Now, here's an interesting fact. According to histories of the game of lacrosse, it was John de Brebeuf who named the present-day version of the native people's game lacrosse, because the stick that was used reminded him of the bishop's crossier, or lacrosse. He served as superior of the Jesuit missions in Canada for some time.
The epidemics, which were caused by the Europeans' contact with the native people, incited continuous revolts against the missionaries, which on several occasions included violence. Father John struggled in traveling, while he and his companions were preceded by the rumor that they were the worst of witch doctors, so they were sometimes treated with contempt. Father John de Brebeuf was martyred in 1649, tortured to death by the Iroquois, who were enemies of the Wendat. They tortured him for making the sign of the cross over a child's head, which was mistaken for some type of curse.
Let's continue the story of the North American Martyrs by hearing about Saint Isaac Jogues. The fifth of 9 children, Isaac Jogues was born in a prosperous family. He could have decided to continue the family's legacy in business or take up a law career, but he decided to follow his teachers and become a Jesuit. He was ordained to the priesthood in 1636 and was eager to go to the Jesuit missions abroad. After 8 weeks of sailing, he arrived at the trading post in present-day New Brunswick, Canada, which numbered 25 Frenchmen and 2 Jesuits.
A week later, Father Isaac resumed his sea voyage, spending 2 days at Tadoussac, where he made contact with the indigenous people there, and then continued towards Quebec, which he left immediately again to go on to the Trois Rivières. The sight of his fellow Jesuits, who were emaciated and terribly aged after a few years of life as missionaries, made a deep impression on Father Isaac. He even witnessed the torture of an Iroquois prisoner at the hands of Wendat warriors. His letter correspondence, however, does not contain any evidence that he was afraid. They demonstrate only zeal and strength of character.
He landed at the small Wendat village on September 11th, after 16 days traveling. The Wendat gave him the name On de Sank, meaning bird of prey. Sometime afterwards, he came down with a fever. Epidemic spread throughout the village, and by 1637, the Wendat consul decided that the cause must have been the Jesuits' arrival, and that they must be executed. However, the epidemic ended without this action being necessary.
On August 3rd, 1642, Father Isaac Jogues was captured by the Mohawks, enslaved, tortured, and mutilated for 13 months. Even so, he taught the faith to any who would listen. With the help of local Dutch settlers, he finally escaped and was sent back to France to recover. In 1644, he actually returned to Canada to continue his work with the natives and negotiate peace with the Iroquois. What strength of character this shows to me. Father Isaac was martyred when the natives blamed Christian sorcery for an epidemic and crop failure. He was tomahawked in the head by an Iroquois chief on October the 18th, 1646, in what would become upstate New York. His head was displayed on a pole and his body was thrown into the Mohawk River. So, Jason, although their martyrdom came at the hands of the native people, it's actually not historically accurate to say that the indigenous peoples were all against the Jesuit missionaries.
Right, Angela. According to the Martyrs Shrine website, quote, "The Jesuit relations and allied documents of the 17th century, written largely by the missionaries, are one of the few surviving sources of information serving to help indigenous people preserve and protect their own history. These letters form the basis of our modern understanding of the practical and pious experiences that early Jesuit missionaries had, as well as their interaction with the indigenous peoples of that time, and how their religious worldview shaped that often complex, turbulent, faith-filled, and loving experience. The Jesuits of Canada and the ministry at Martyrs Shrine are proud guardians of this early history that form some of the foundation stories of modern Canada. Work continues on developing a deeper understanding of the early relationships with missionaries, the indigenous people, and the community that they shared." Unquote.
Well, I think we can start our pilgrimage visit to the shrine now, spiritually, of course, and this will enlighten some of what you just shared with us, Jason.
Yes, so let's do that. We, of course, will be continuing to learn about the other martyrs and the important indigenous people who helped them along the way. So the Martyrs Shrine that you see on the hill today in Midland, Ontario, replaced a much smaller shrine by the same name in Wabashin, about 12 kilometers from the present shrine. In 1907, the Archbishop of Toronto blessed a small chapel near the site of martyrdom of Fathers John de Brebeuf and Gabriel Lalemant. For 18 years, thousands of devout pilgrims visited this humble shrine and stayed at the 40-room shrine hostel nearby. In June 1925, Father John M. Filion, then Provincial Superior of English-speaking Jesuits across Canada, felt the need for a larger shrine that would be closer both to pure spring water and to the Santa Maria Mission headquarters of the original missionaries.
Yeah, so what Father Filion did is he purchased a farm on the hill across the road from the mission. He promised to have a new shrine church built in time for the first anniversary of the martyrs' beatification on July 21st, 1926. The shrine was built before the archaeological digging of Sainte Marie and the burial sites of Saints Brebeuf and Lalemant were discovered. The shrine was built nearby. So why don't we pause here and learn about St. Gabriel Lalemant? He was the nephew of the Jesuit missionaries Charles and Jerome Lalemant. Gabriel entered the Jesuits in Paris, France on March 24th, 1630. He arrived to Canada as a missionary on September 20th, 1646, and was assigned as assistant to Father Saint John de Brebeuf among the Wendat people in early 1649. He was soon martyred with them. Father Gabriel was tortured to death by some Iroquois warriors over the course of 3 hours on March 17, 1649, at the St. Ignatius Mission.
The site of this martyrdom was discovered in August 1954, when Father Dennis Hegarty uncovered the Santa Maria Mission Chapel, a lead grave plaque, which read in French, quote, "Father John de Brebeuf, burned by the Iroquois on March 17th, year 1649, unquote. This discovery occurred 5 years after the 300th year anniversary of the deaths of those martyrs. A trainload of pilgrims came from Quebec City with Archbishop Maurice Roy, taking personal charge of the skull of Brebeuf, which came up the hill in a solemn procession. In 1964, the Jesuits negotiated an agreement with the government of Ontario, whereby the historic site of the original mission and adjoining land on the south side of the Highway 12 were leased to the provincial government for 100 years for a consideration of $1. In turn, the government undertook the rebuilding and operation of Santa Maria. The recreated Santa Maria site was designed to allow students and visitors an opportunity to step back in time and to experience the life in the early 17th century. It was designed to activate a deeper sense of learning, consciousness, and understanding of a moment in history that marks one of the most important times in the formation of modern Canada.
The other portion of the Martyrs Shrine is the main church building, which gives significant insight and testament to the complex relationship between the Jesuits and the indigenous people. Acting as his own architect, engineer, and foreman, Father John Filion secured a bank loan, hired 50 local shipbuilders, and begged for some 75,000 board feet of lumber from various companies in the area in the fall of 1925. As part of the scheme that served to enhance the story of the martyrs' experience in the 17th century, he requested that the ceiling be shaped as an inverted canoe. The meaning behind this shape is not only to represent the vessel which often transported the missionaries, but also the wisdom of the indigenous people, who would during a storm create a shelter out of their canoe by inverting it and staying underneath the waterproof structure. Father Filion wanted the church to be seen as a safe shelter for all. Parts of the church construction were also used to resemble a native longhouse. The incorporation of both native and European design elements in the architecture was intended to make both groups feel welcomed at Mass.
Wow, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Stonemason Reuben Webb used Longford limestone from an east side of Lake Simcoe for an exterior facade of the church, which is in the Belgian Gothic Revival style. Fixtures were collected from the Paulist Church in Toronto and from the Cathedral in London, Ontario, both coincidentally undergoing renovations at that time. Chief fixtures that were obtained including the 3 altars, communion rail, rose windows, pews, and the 14 stations of the cross. It was a long fall and winter season for Father Filion and the tradesmen who battled the Canadian weather to erect the shrine church in time. On June 26, 1926, in advance of Father Filion's deadline, the church was finally built. On the following day, June 27th, the weather turned warm and sunny, and the shrine was solemnly inaugurated by 7 Canadian bishops, led by Archbishop Neil McNeill of Toronto, and before a record congregation of some 13,000 pilgrims who gathered for the Pontifical High Mass. Bishop Michael Fallon of London preached the sermon on the outside steps of the shrine church for the crowds assembled on the hill.
Nearly 4 years to the day later, on June 29, 1930, as Pope Pius XI was canonizing the 8 Canadian martyrs in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, another vast congregation gathered in front of the altar at the 12th station of the cross on the hill overlooking Georgian Bay. Once more, Archbishop McNeill celebrated a massive Thanksgiving, and this time Monsignor Joseph O'Sullivan, rector of St. Augustine Seminary, Toronto, preached. Well, Jason, it's really interesting to learn about this shrine because, I had never known that there was a shrine to the North American Martyrs until we looked into it.
Same. Exact same thing for me, Angela. It's one of those things where, we're so blessed here on earth to have all of these different shrines, basilicas, whether they're major or minor, to have all this out in the world for us to discover and to truly learn the reason behind them and why there is a shrine there, right? Mm-hmm. And normally in this case, it expands beyond that particular location.
Right.
Because not only are there martyrs in Canada, but also in New York State. Mm-hmm. So, this is truly an important destination to kind of dig deeper into.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when we hear about the feasts of certain martyrs, we kind of think of them as like this group of just people who died for their faith. And while that is very admirable, and we celebrate them in the church calendar and everything, a lot of times I'm tempted to be like, well, okay, they must have just died for their faith and that was it, and
right.
Just kind of leave it there.
Yep.
But to really look into this group of people, at first it's kind of daunting because there's so many of them. I mean, considerably, or relatively speaking, 8 people may not be a huge number in terms of martyrs all over, the world and everything. But at the same time, these particular folks were Jesuits, and they were actually not just like the one standard idea of what a missionary was at the time. I think it's really cool when you look into their personalities that they were so unique, in their individual selves.
Yeah, definitely. And just think about, in this particular case here with these martyrs they were speaking about and learning about, they did a lot of work, and the work they did was not easy. The one example that sticks out to me is Saint John de Brebeuf. He wrote a catechism in Huron. So not only does he understand the catechism, right, but he understands it to the depth that he can then learn another language and put it in that language, so that way those people can learn it as well. So that way the indigenous Huron people can learn the catechism. Talk about evangelization. Truly, truly beautiful that he did that, along with a dictionary, for other missionaries to use. So talk about being a pebble in a pond.
Yeah.
Saint John de Brebeuf certainly was.
It's really interesting when you think about him, because as we said, his missionary works as far as conversions were not considered to be generally successful. And at the same time, he is the one that a lot of people, when we say the North American Martyrs, it's like, oh, Father John de Brebeuf and companions.
Right.
So the fact that he was not the one that was like converting a lot of people, but he did plant those seeds, and he did have that endurance and strength of character that is really still an admirable thing and important when you're talking about, going out to people who have never heard the gospel before. Indeed.
And we really haven't even covered all of the martyrs in this first segment. So, what's to come in the second segment, there's more efforts that were made, and there's more incredible stories about that. And to me, that's what's really exciting, is we get to hear about the work that was done. And you have a great point in saying that maybe it was not considered, successful, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes. But at the time, for the people, for the work that he was doing as a missionary, to him, to accomplish that catechism in the Huron language, that was a success right there. That was something that without that, who knows how many people would not have come to even begin to learn about Christianity. Yeah. And also, what's really neat as we continue this story is that the Wendat people themselves appear to have been, obviously there's always going to be, division in a community when newcomers come along, but there were a lot that accepted the missionaries, and they were interested in learning, and they did actually become baptized. As we learn more about these different missionaries, many of them had great friendships and working relationships with these people. They really cared about them, and as we'll see further, they did lay down their lives. And in many cases, it was very clear that they laid down their lives to protect the people. So, I think nowadays there's a lot of conversation, right, around the church's relationship with indigenous peoples over time. And the Pope Francis is, widening and broadening that conversation, which is great. At the same time, it's I think today we tend to think black and white. Right. We tend to think kind of like in a comic book or like a short story, a novel or something, where it's like there's the good guys and the bad guys. And sometimes life is way more complicated than that. Oftentimes life is way more complicated than that. And so that's kind of where we are with talking about the North American Martyrs. Yeah, indeed. And you bring up Point Francis. And so he himself is a Jesuit. That's right. So, I can only imagine, with him taking this approach for us to kind of go more and, with the indigenous people, these martyrs may be praying for Pope Francis in taking those steps. That's a great point. I mean, they continue to intercede for us as a church. And I'm sure that, as we go on further in time, that we come to learn more about each other, all these different communities. And hopefully, we can certainly, recognize that there were some damages done. There were also some beautiful things that happened. And to just embrace the beautiful, and definitely to, make reparation, find justice for those that need it, those that are due it, and
and to, from as I'm learning about the North American Martyrs, I'm learning not just about them, but also about the indigenous people as well.
Right.
So it's really kind of bridging something for me.
Yeah, it is. What you said just a moment ago, embracing the beautiful, right? That's an approach that we can use in these kind of situations. We just read about one of the martyrs who was, tomahawked, right? But we focus on the work that was done, and we embrace the beautiful. We embrace that, and I really like the point that you put there. So to me, that's really, really awesome. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there are other martyrs that we will get to learn about. We have covered a couple now, a couple in this segment.
Two big ones.
Right. Yeah, I guess the big two, right?
Big two.
The big two. First one being Saint John de Brebeuf, right? And the second one being?
Saint Isaac Jogues.
Yes, indeed, Saint Isaac Jogues. So there is more to come. So we ask you to stick with us. For now, we are going to take a quick break, friends. You're listening to Journeys of Hope. I'm Jason Nunez, Media Ministry Assistant for Pilgrim Center of Hope. And joining me is Angela Sealana. We are taking you on a spiritual pilgrimage to the Shrine of the North American Martyrs, located in Midland, Ontario, Canada. Now, when of course we return, we will learn more about the shrine, and we'll see how these saints can inspire us today.
You're on the everyday journey of life, and sometimes it's tough to keep hope alive. Well, that's why Pilgrim Center of Hope is here for you. Not only does Pilgrim Center of Hope provide you programs like Journeys of Hope here on Guadalupe Radio Network, but did you know you can also find other helpful media productions from Pilgrim Center of Hope on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Every first Friday, take an audio retreat with Jesus called Meet the Master. Every third Thursday, have a social with the saints. And our new quarterly series, Who is the Man of the Shroud, meets at the intersection of faith, true crime, science and medicine, history, art, and much more. Find it all at pilgrimcenterofhope.org or on your favorite podcast app. And keep hope alive in your daily journey. Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ.
Welcome back to Journeys of Hope. I am Jason Nunez, Media Ministry Assistant for Pilgrim Center of Hope, taking you on a spiritual pilgrimage with the North American Martyrs. Before the break, we had just met three of them, Saint John de Brebeuf, Saint Isaac Jogues, and Saint Gabriel Lalemant. We also learned about some of the grounds and history of the shrine.
Yes, I don't want to leave out St. Gabriel Lalemant, definitely.
Yes.
But those, as we were saying before the break, those two, Saints John de Brebeuf and St. Isaac Jogues, those are the ones that I had heard of before we started, doing this journey, and now bringing in St. Gabriel Lalemant and many more as we continue. So Martyrs Shrine evolved throughout the years and remains a priority commitment of the Canadian Jesuit ministry. According to the Shrine's website, quote, "It has formed itself into something modeling that of the original Jesuit-led Sainte Marie mission, which served as a center of retreat, spiritual formation, education, and discovery, and cultural integration, honoring both the lives of the North American martyrs and the First Nations communities whom they served," unquote. In fact, part of the Shrine's work today includes welcoming the First Nations pilgrimage, providing complimentary admission for Indigenous persons, and offering a Way of the Cross for Canadian Indian residential schools to pray in solidarity with survivors of the Indian residential school system. Here is a quote from Jesuit missionary Saint John de Brebeuf, demonstrating his deep admiration for the Indigenous people. Quote, "Their belief and dreams is unbelievable, and if Christians were to put into practice every divine inspiration with as much care as these natives carry out their dreams, these Christians would soon reach high sanctity."
In 1984, John Paul II visited the shrine, announcing to the world that this martyr shrine is a place of pilgrimage and prayer and a monument of God's blessing in the past and inspiration as we look to the future. The Pope reconsecrated the recreated Church of St. Joseph, located at Santa Maria Mission, which holds the flesh remains of Saints Brebeuf and Lalemant, along with an indulgence that for any Roman Catholic who come to the shrine on pilgrimage were to receive blessing equal to that of a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Wow.
Yeah, that was one of the cool things that we found out as we were researching that I was really impressed by.
Yes.
Today, some 100,000 pilgrims and visitors continue to visit the shrine annually each year. It is a national shrine as well as a National Historic Site of Canada. The shrine is located on Highway 12, just outside of Midland, Ontario. This land is where the shrine is located because it is the original location of the Jesuit mission from 1639 to 1650 among the Wendat people, whom the French called Hurons. The mission headquarters itself was named Sainte Marie, and the reconstruction of that is located directly across the highway from the church. It is surrounded by a log fence and integrates both European as well as indigenous culture.
Also on the grounds on Rosemont Road is the site of the martyrdom of Saint John de Brebeuf and Saint Gabriel Lalemant, who were tortured to death. It is named Saint Ignace after Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit religious order. Here we see two tall stakes in the ground, and between them a wooden cross. Saints John and Gabriel's bodies were left by the Iroquois after their deaths, and the Jesuits recovered the bodies and buried them at the back of the church at Sainte Marie, which was named after Saint Joseph. When the Jesuits decided to move the site of Sainte Marie, they took the martyrs' bones to Quebec and left their flesh in the graves at Sainte Marie.
In 1992, to mark the 150th anniversary of the return of the Jesuits to Canada, the Jesuits of Quebec offered the precious relic of the skull of Saint John de Brebeuf to the Martyrs Shrine. Now housed in a reliquary inside the shrine church, it rests alongside the leg bones of Saint Gabriel Lalemant and Saint René Goupil. Many pilgrims have visited the shrine seeking mental and physical healing and intercession through the relics of these saints. Many prayers have been answered, and alongside of the relics of the martyrs, the shrine keeps the remains of physical aids, such as canes, crutches, hearing aids, etc., from these pilgrims who have been blessed by healing and miracles.
Angela, since you mentioned Saint René Goupil, let's meet him and hear his story. René entered the Jesuit novitiate in Paris, France, but his deafness prevented his formally joining the order. He studied medicine and in 1639 offered to work as a medic for the Jesuit missionaries in America. And of course that he did working as a donné, which is a layman who volunteered to work without pay. René worked in a hospital in Quebec, Canada. In 1640, he served as an assistant to Saint Isaac Jogues on his missionary travels. They were captured and tortured by Iroquois enemies of the Wendat for making the sign of the cross over a child's hood, which was mistaken for some type of curse. While they were in captivity, Father Isaac received René into the Jesuits as a religious brother. René was the very first martyr in North America. His death by tomahawk in the head led to his patronage of people who work with or receive anesthesia.
Wow, what a unique person.
Yes, indeed.
Saint René Goupil, pray for us.
Yes, please.
Let's continue our pilgrim walk around Martyrs Shrine. If we walk inside the shrine church, we will see the 3 rose windows donated by St. Peter's Church in Toronto, as well as large paintings of the 12 Stations of the Cross and 26 colorful stained glass windows from Germany. These were donated by St. Peter's Cathedral in London, Ontario. One stained glass window depicts a Wendat or Huron man named Joseph Chiwetenwa guiding St. John de Brebeuf underneath a tree. Joseph Chiwetenwa was the second Wendat to receive the sacrament of baptism and became a great friend and advocate for the Jesuits and Christianity, even to his own endangerment. I think it's awesome that he is honored at this shrine, because he himself actually became a missionary in a way among the Wendat people, as all of us are called to do when we receive the gospel, to share it wherever we are.
Angela, believe it or not, there are still 4 more North American martyrs that we have to meet on our pilgrimage.
Yep.
So let's continue by meeting Jean de Lalande, who was a Dane. Now, as we previously explained, he was a layperson who volunteered with the missionaries without pay, who in return gave him lodging, food, and help in case of illness. In 1646, John went with Father Isaac Jogues and a few Wendat people to go to the Iroquois country in order to maintain peaceful relations with them. At a certain point, all the Wendat except one turned back because they were so impressed by the dangers of the journey. When they reached their destination, they were both killed because of rumors of their so-called dangerous witchcraft.
Right, and the other 3 North American martyrs were also killed by Iroquois. Father Noel Chabanel's martyrdom came as he was attempting to save the lives of Wendat Christians, leading them away from a massacre by the Iroquois. He had had terrible trouble adapting to the mission fields, the food, the native languages, the conditions. Still, he vowed before Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament that if necessary, he would spend the rest of his life in that work. And he did.
Another of the North American martyrs is Saint Antoine Daniel, who was murdered outside the chapel in which he had just celebrated Mass, shot with arrows. In one of St. John de Brebeuf's writings, he recalled how Father Daniel had arranged the Our Father prayer in the Wendat language into a song, which the Wendat enjoyed singing along, especially the children.
Yeah, that really struck me. It was so interesting. The final North American martyr, St. Charles Garnier, was a missionary among the Wendat for 13 years. He died when the fort at which he was stationed, Fort Saint Jean, was attacked by Iroquois. Father Charles spent his last hours ministering to the dying before he was murdered, shot in the chest and abdomen, and tomahawked in the head on December the 7th, 1649. You know, I'm really grateful to be able to learn about the North American martyrs as well as their relationship with the Native people, which, as we mentioned previously, is definitely complex. And it's also interesting to learn about the Martyrs Shrine and how they're trying to communicate this part of our story, our history, with great love and care.
Great love and care is right, Angela, and it's no easy task.
Yes.
It's a task that deserves to be done, and they certainly are going down that path there, which thanks be to God they are.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, along with the Living History Museum at the original St. Marie Mission, the church offers the sacraments to pilgrims as well as blessings with the relics of the martyrs, feast day celebrations, processions, and the Stations of the Cross. There is also a pilgrim guest house, gift shop, and cafe. And of course, Shrine of Gardens for pilgrims and visitors to pray and reflect. At various times throughout the year, both in-person and virtual retreats are also available. The Jesuits of the Martyrs Shrine also lead the pastoral care for 2 mission churches, as well as pastoral support to local parishes, schools, and healthcare centers as well.
That's a lot of work.
Yes, it is.
And, it's really beautiful. We just, in the limited amount of time that we have, we can't, describe all of the details of this amazing place. But definitely you can look at pictures of the church, the gardens, so many other things there on the Martyrs Shrine website, which we're linking.
Yes, we certainly are.
On
definitely.
our website as well. So we encourage you to look at that. Jason, there's so much that we could take from today's pilgrimage. What is something that you've learned through this journey?
Well, I've learned, the life of a missionary, and in this case, the Jesuit missionaries. It's a very intentional life. Mm-hmm. They take up a life where they exist to spread the good news, and they exist to spread the good news to people this is the first time they're hearing about it. You know, and to me, that's so amazing. You know, of course, in the first segment, we spoke about Saint John de Brebeuf and how he translated the catechism into the Huron language. And in the second segment, we hear how the Our Father was translated into song, you know, so that way it can be sung by the Wendat people. And it's just different ways to evangelize, whether it's through the catechism or it's through song. That's one of the many beautiful aspects of our faith. It's not just one thing. You know, truly it is one thing, which is, you know, Jesus Christ. But to get to that one thing, people take different paths to it.
Right.
You know, it's almost like what's in my mind when I talk about this is like looking at an ant farm, right? You know, there's all these different paths. They're not all the same and they're not all straight. You know, they go up and down, some are narrows, but they all, you know, they're all leading somewhere. And that to me is really amazing. And these missionaries were doing it. They were doing it in the ways with the gifts that they were blessed with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they were all different. That's very well said. They were all different. And then each of them were able to have different relationships with the different peoples. The Wendat people in particular, you know, we've been talking about a lot. You know, you mentioned the catechism, but that Father Jean de Brebeuf created, and also the song that Father Antoine Daniel created or composed. I also remember reading about how, you know, when I think it was Father Isaac Jogues and Father Antoine would be with them Wendat, that they would do like a question and answer with the kids.
Oh, wow.
And the parents would be there, and they were really excited to see their kids, you know, learning and everything. And as I was reading about that, I couldn't help but just think about my own times in church.
Right.
You know, where I've been helping with like the teens, you know, learning their faith and seeing their parents also respond in similar ways. You know, it just goes to show that no matter what the time period is, no matter what the language is, no matter what the culture is, like there are some things that are always going to be the same, that are going to bring us together as human beings, right? Like just the joy of being a child, of being a parent, the joy of learning, the joy of like singing, of, you know, having a meal together. I mean, these are things that are like the bread and butter of the missionary experience, you know, just coming to understand the common, you know, ground that you have with this other culture, this completely other culture. You don't know their language or anything. I mean, you have to be able to find those people who are willing to take you on.
Right.
And so it's like, you just have to be a human being with them, you know?
yeah, definitely. It's meeting people where they are. And believe it or not, you, Angela, me, Jason, you know, person listening, we are all missionaries.
Yeah.
You know, we may not be called to go to a foreign land and learn a new language by immersing ourselves in it, right? We are missionaries as we're out in the street, as we're shopping for our groceries, as we're going through our daily things. You know, anyone we encounter, you know, there is an opportunity, you know, for us to be the face of Christ to them, and also to show them, you know, the good news, and possibly a peek into a life, if that is at the forefront of yours own.
Yeah, I mean, I was even thinking of like sports. You know, we talked about lacrosse.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, going to sports games. You know, you're going to be with other people who enjoy sports. Like, you know, sometimes just things come up. You talk with each other. You're like, you know, oh, what part of town are you from, or where are you from, and you know, maybe what school did you go to? Some people went to Catholic school, right? And then that topic comes up, you know, and it's like, oh, you know, you start talking about that and kind of how we can share with each other and kind of relate on that human level. Sometimes that helps to kind of have those conversations where if you're not in that context of like the sports game or whatever it is that you share with that person, it might be awkward otherwise. But, you know, when you can find those common ground situations, it's like, hey, maybe you're not so bad, like.
Right, yeah, that's definitely. Now, when you're bringing up the scenario of sports, the first thing that comes to mind is, more often than not, when I'm watching sports, I'll see a John 3:16 sign.
Oh, true.
Right, and to me, that's big. That's big, because for that casual sports fan, or for that sports fan that noticed it once, twice, three times, at some point they're going to get curious. What is John 3:16? Why do I see this at sporting events? What's its reference? Is this the score? Is this the record of the team? The team's not...
Who's John?
Yeah, who's John? I know the team is not John, or they're the Fighting Johns, right?
Yeah.
So what is John 3:16? Thanks be to God we have technology. We could just simply look it up. And in those instances, it's my hope and my prayer that the person who does that reads beyond John 3:16, which in itself is beautiful, but the following lines after that are also powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to really talk about here. One of the other things that I'm thinking about as we're sharing about the North American Martyrs is that, we talk about this time in history where missionaries were going out and, they were accompanied sometimes by soldiers, or there was forts. We talked about how one of the martyrs died near a fort. There was the reality of the church and the government, and the relationship between those two was different, now
right.
than it is in most places in the world. And there was this relationship that, nowadays when we look back, it's really hairy thinking about how the military was, doing certain things, the church was doing certain things. Sometimes there was some, back and forth. Sometimes there was some, you did this, why did you do this? And maybe it wasn't a helpful situation in certain moments. But, I just think about how nowadays we're thinking about this whole situation. It's like, man, this was a different time,
Right.
So for me, as I continue to learn, and as we're researching on the wonderful Martyrs Shrine website, just the information that they have, when we're looking up the history at this point in time in the world, I myself am thinking, like, even more so to respect just every point in history, right, in its own proper context, and just to say to myself, wow, like, this was a different time, let me learn about it, and to not necessarily put my own ideas of what things I think the way things should have been based on my experience of life, but to really kind of learn about, like, respecting each time in history, and just kind of, what can we learn from that, right? Like,
right.
There's so much to gain.
There really is. And understanding the concept is the key in that kind of approach. Because having that surface level understanding, you're missing a big chunk of what happened, right? So digging into these matters and understanding the context, it could totally shift your paradigm.
Right.
Totally shift the way you think about something. And when you do that, just like the life of a missionary, you're being intentional. And to me, that's key. That's so, so important. Wow, these North American martyrs, I'm very, very glad that this is a topic that we decided to, take a dive into.
Yes.
I'm very much like you. Early on in the episode, you mentioned, well, there were these group of people that, died for our faith, so they showed bravery. Wow, that's amazing. I don't know if I could be that brave, but I could pray that if I'm ever in that situation, that I would be as brave as them. Okay, what else is happening?
Yeah.
And,
just moving on.
Yeah, moving on. What else is going on today, right?
Right.
Yeah, so, taking time to really dig into and understanding that context.
Yes.
Wow. That's
it
really, really
changes
amazing.
everything.
It does.
I mean, it does. And that's one of the blessings of having these spiritual pilgrimages on Journeys of Hope.
Right.
Is that we talk about the history. We talk about the cultures. We talk about the languages. We talk about, all these different things that, ultimately our faith doesn't live in a vacuum. Our faith is related to where we are in time and history and in our culture.
Yeah, indeed. And, the fact that this is available, for everyone to listen to, this is not only us learning and us understanding the concept, the context, actually. This is us spreading out to others, so that way, if there's just one piece that catches, someone's attention or piques someone's interest, then they can dig more into that.
Yeah.
And just as you said earlier, the website of the Martyrs Shrine has a lot of information. On there's definitely pictures, and sometimes putting those pictures into the context with what you're learning, it helps that understanding and that recollection even. So definitely, we do encourage that you can actually access the Martyrs Shrine website by going to pilgrimcenterofhope.org. So the web page for this episode will have a link straight to that page there, to that website, which will make it easier for you. And we, of course, will also have a map view of the Martyrs Shrine, which also, in a way, kind of helps that understanding. This is in Canada, so we're not going to have a lot of dry land everywhere, and kind of some of the terrain that there are in other parts of the world. Certainly is beautiful to see it from that map standpoint as well.
Right, it is. Yeah, a lot of great resources there for you as well.
Yes, indeed. And once again, that's pilgrimcenterofhope.org. So sorry, Angela, I can't get, Father Saint Antoine Daniel. I can't move past that just yet, because, he, the way he was martyred, it reminds me so much of Saint Oscar Romero, and which is another saint, right? And a saint that was also martyred. And my gosh, it's just, that's one thing as we dig into these episodes and learn about these different aspects of our faith. And when we go into the saints, that's one thing that really never ceases to surprise me, which is there's similarities to lives or the way these saints pass away. And it's just time after time I come across these examples.
Right. Yeah. And one of the cool things I think that we can talk about is the jewel for the journey for this week that has to do with Father Antoine.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, great segue. Thanks for that, Angela. So yes, so this certainly does bring us to our jewel for the journey. So as is our tradition, we of course want to give you a jewel for the journey, which is a spiritual gem that you can reflect on throughout the week. So today's jewel for the journey is a quote from St. Antoine Daniel. And here it is. Quote, "Keep the faith to your dying breath," unquote.
Wow.
So powerful, right?
It is. Keep the faith to your dying breath is, it's not just the obvious of what he did, but it's also kind of saying with every breath that you take, keep your faith, and in every moment that you live. And that's one of the beautiful lessons that I think we can walk away from for this journey of hope.
Yes, indeed.
So is it about time to close in prayer?
It certainly is, Angela. If you can please, do the honors.
All right. Well, this is a prayer from the U.S. bishops for the North American Martyrs. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
O God, who by the preaching of and blood of your sainted martyrs, Isaac and John and their companions, did consecrate the first fruits of the faith in the vast regions of North America, graciously grant that by their intercession, the flourishing harvest of Christians may everywhere and always be increased. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. So thank you very much for joining us on Journeys of Hope. We do invite you to come visit Pilgrim Center of Hope and learn more about our threefold ministry of pilgrimages, conferences, and media production outreach. We are a nonprofit ministry, and we welcome your donations. Every bit helps. Join us on this vital mission of evangelization as we guide people to Christ and the Church. You can donate online at pilgrimcenterofhope.org or by calling us at 210-521-3377. That's 210-521-3377. Again, our website is pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Fellow pilgrims, let's strive to live each day of our journey with love, faith, courage, and hope. Until next time, May God bless you and safe travels.
Journeys of Hope, a production of Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ. Visit our website at pilgrimcenterofhope.org.